5 years from now, if you had told Weston Calloway that everything good left in his life would begin with cowardice, he would have believed you. Cowardice was the only language he still spoke fluently. It lived in the way he avoided mirrors after dark, in the way he kept Shelby's winter coat hanging by the front door as though she might walk through it any Tuesday evening, snow in her hair, complaining about the highway. Cowardice had a taste metallic and familiar, like the blood he'd bitten from his own tongue the night he watched her casket sink into November earth while his daughter gripped his index finger with both hands and asked why Mommy's box was going underground. But we are not there yet. We are standing in a fluorescent-lit office on the 9th floor of Grayson Development's corporate headquarters in downtown Richmond, Virginia at 11:47 on a Thursday night, and Weston Calloway is bleeding from a cut above his left eyebrow where a filing cabinet drawer caught him on the way open. His hands are full of paper. His heart is full of noise. The building's ventilation hums a low mechanical hymn that sounds almost peaceful until you realize it is the only thing standing between him and absolute silence. And absolute silence is the sound a man hears right before everything collapses. His phone buzzes in his jacket pocket. He pulls it out with shaking fingers, leaving a thumbprint of blood on the screen, and reads the caller ID. June. His 7-year-old daughter, who should be asleep, who should be dreaming about the Stegosaurus puppet she built last week from egg cartons and pipe cleaners, is calling him at 11:47 on a Thursday night. He answers. Her voice comes through small and cracked the way glass sounds right before it shatters. "Daddy, there's someone outside our house. They keep walking back and forth by the front window." The documents in his hand suddenly weigh 1,000 pounds. Every instinct in his body fires at once, fight and flight tangled together in a knot so tight he cannot breathe. He is 40 minutes from home. He is standing inside the locked records room of a man who would burn this city to the ground before letting anyone see what Weston is holding. And his daughter, his only remaining proof that love is not just a word people carve on headstones, is alone. "June, listen to me. Go to your room. Lock the door. Push the chair under the handle like we practiced. Do not open it for anyone except me or Mrs. Bellamy. Can you do that?" "I already did, Daddy. I'm under the covers." "Good girl. I'm coming home right now." "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Are you in trouble?" He looks down at the papers. Grayson Development letterhead. Internal memos dated 4 years ago. Blood test results that were supposed to have been destroyed. A name circled in red ink that matches the name on his wife's death certificate. "No, sweetheart, everything's going to be fine." He has never been a convincing liar. But tonight he needs to be. Now freeze this. Hold this frame. Hold this bleeding man with stolen papers and a terrified child on the phone. Hold it steady, because to understand how a factory mechanic ended up committing a felony inside a billionaire's office building while his daughter barricaded herself in her bedroom, you need to go back 4 months to a Tuesday afternoon in late September when the only crime Weston Calloway committed was agreeing to drink coffee with a stranger. 4 months earlier. The alarm went off at 5:15, same as every morning, and Weston's hand found the button before his eyes found the ceiling. Muscle memory. His entire life ran on muscle memory now. Shower 6 minutes, shave 2. Dress in the dark so the light under the door would not wake June across the hall. Downstairs. Coffee machine already programmed from the night before, because at some point he had realized that the difference between surviving and drowning was the number of decisions he could eliminate before sunrise. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living space barely large enough for the second-hand couch and the television. June watched nature documentaries on every evening while he graded her math worksheets at the table. The rent was $1,600 a month, which was exactly 56% of his take-home pay of $28.47 from the maintenance shop at Harmon Industrial, where he spent 9 hours a day repairing stamping presses and hydraulic systems and pretending that the grease under his fingernails did not bother a man who had once designed load-bearing structures for a living. He had been a structural engineer, a good one. The kind of engineer whose calculations other engineers trusted without double-checking which in the profession was the highest compliment available. He had worked for a mid-sized firm in Norfolk, earned $78,000 a year, owned a house with a yard, drove a truck that did not make suspicious noises above 40 miles per hour, and went to bed every night beside a woman who smelled like lavender and argued with him about paint colors with the intensity of a courtroom attorney. Then Shelby died, and the architecture of his life collapsed faster than any building he had ever analyzed. He stopped sleeping, then he stopped eating, then he stopped showing up to the office, and when the firm called to check on him, he told them he was fine, which was the first of many lies he would tell over the next 4 years. He lost the job, sold the house because the mortgage was a mouth that kept feeding whether you had anything to give it or not, moved into the apartment, got hired at Harmon Industrial because they needed a man who could read technical drawings and did not ask questions about his resume gaps. $28.47 a month, $1,600 for rent, $340 for June's insurance, $220 for the truck payment, groceries, utilities, gas, the occasional copay when June's asthma flared up in winter. What remained was a number so small it barely qualified as money. It was more like a rumor of money, a suggestion that somewhere in the economy there existed a margin between survival and catastrophe, and Weston Calloway lived on that margin the way a tightrope walker lives on wire. June appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30, barefoot, wearing pajamas printed with cartoon planets. Her dark hair was a battlefield. Her eyes, which were Shelby's eyes, brown and enormous and far too observant for a second grader, locked onto him with the penetrating focus of someone who had learned early that adults could not always be trusted to tell the truth. "Daddy, you look tired." "I'm always tired, Bug. Mrs. Bellamy says people who are always tired need help. She says it's okay to ask for help." "Mrs. Bellamy sounds like a smart woman." "She is. She has a master's degree, she told us." "Do you have a master's degree?" "I have a bachelor's." "Is that less?" "Depends on what you do with it." June climbed onto the kitchen stool and reached for the cereal box. She poured with the exaggerated care of a child who had been told too many times to be careful, and milk followed in a thin, measured stream. She ate quietly for several minutes, then looked up. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why don't you ever go anywhere like after work? Other dads go places. Tyler's dad goes bowling. McKenna's dad goes to the gym. You just come home and sit on the couch and look at nothing." The accuracy of the observation landed like a clean punch. Weston took a sip of coffee to buy himself a moment. "I go places." "Where?" "The grocery store. The gas station." "Those aren't places. Those are errands." He almost laughed. Almost. "You're right. They are errands. So why don't you go real places?" "Because real places require energy I do not have. Because real places are full of people who will ask how I am and expect me to say fine, and the word fine has lost all meaning. Because your mother and I used to go real places together, and now every real place is a museum of everything I have lost." "Maybe I will," he told her. "Someday." Mrs. Bellamy says someday is a word people use when they mean never. June Calloway was 7 years old, and she had already figured out the vocabulary of avoidance. Weston was 42, and he was still hiding behind it. He dropped her at school at 7:45, watched her walk through the front doors with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and sat in the parking lot for 2 full minutes after she disappeared. This was his ritual. 2 minutes of making sure the building did not catch fire, did not collapse, did not swallow his daughter into whatever void had taken his wife. 2 minutes of magical thinking disguised as caution. Then he drove to work. Jake Brennan was already at his station when Weston arrived, a hydraulic torque wrench in one hand and a gas station breakfast burrito in the other. Jake was 45, built like a refrigerator, had 3 kids and a wife who ran a dog grooming business out of their garage, and possessed the particular gift of saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right time. "Calloway, you look like reheated death." "Thanks, Jake. I'm serious. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work or parenting?" "I watched a documentary last night." "About what?" "The Cretaceous extinction event." "Was it June's idea?" "Maybe." "West, you're living your 7-year-old's social life. That's a problem." Jake took a massive bite of his burrito and spoke through it, which should have been disgusting but was somehow endearing. "I'm going to say something and you're going to hate it, but I'm saying it anyway because I've watched you sleepwalk through the last 4 years and I'm running out of patience." "Jake." "There's a woman. Her name's Claire. She's a friend of my wife's cousin. She's smart. She's funny. She's been through some stuff herself, so she's not going to judge you for being a mess. I set up a coffee date. Saturday, 2 o'clock, Mapleton Street Cafe." The refusal was already forming on Weston's tongue, a habitual no that required less energy than breathing. He had said no to every attempt at human connection since Shelby's funeral. No to his sister Sophie's suggestions, no to his mother's gentle hints, no to the school counselor who had once pulled him aside and told him with carefully practiced kindness that June was worried about him. "I can't." "You can. You just won't. It's the same thing." "It absolutely is not, and the fact that you think it is proves my point." Jake set down the wrench. 1 hour. That's it. 60 minutes. If she's terrible, blame me. If you're terrible, blame me. Either way, you'll have left your apartment for a reason that isn't groceries, and your daughter will stop thinking her father has given up on being alive. The words landed harder than Jake probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he intended. With Jake, it was difficult to tell. "Fine. Fine. 1 hour. Then I never have to hear about this again. Deal." Jake grinned the grin of a man who had just won a war. Weston turned to his workbench and tried to focus on the disassembled gearbox in front of him, but his hands were doing one thing and his mind was doing another, and somewhere beneath the anxiety and the exhaustion and the 4-year-old grief that had calcified around his heart like plaque around an artery, something stirred. Not hope. Hope was too expensive. Something cheaper. Something closer to curiosity, which was hope's poor cousin, the one who showed up uninvited and left before dessert. Saturday arrived the way trouble arrives, faster than expected, and with no viable exit strategy. Weston spent the morning cleaning the apartment, which did not need cleaning, but gave his hands something to do besides shake. He ironed a shirt, then changed his mind and put on a different shirt, then changed his mind again and went back to the first one, which is the behavior of a man who has not tried to impress another human being in half a decade and has forgotten the protocol. June watched this from the hallway with the silent judgment of a small anthropologist. "You look nice, Daddy." "Thank you. Are you going on a date?" "It's just coffee, Mrs. Bellamy says when boys say just coffee, it means they like someone but they're scared. Mrs. Bellamy has a lot of opinions. She's very smart. She has a master's degree. I already told you." He drove to Mapleton Street Cafe and parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full, then walked in autumn air that smelled like dried leaves and chimney smoke and something else he could not name, but that reminded him viscerally of every October he and Shelby had ever shared. The cafe was on a corner brick facade, large windows. He approached it the way a man approaches a building he suspects might be condemned, slowly watching for cracks. Through the window he saw her. She was sitting at a table near the glass, and even from outside he could see that she was pretty. Dark blonde hair pulled back loosely, a face that looked like it had done a lot of laughing and a fair amount of crying, and had decided that the laughing was more important. She wore a green jacket, and she was checking her phone, and everything about her looked normal except for the wheelchair. Weston stopped walking. It was not the wheelchair that stopped him. It was the sudden violent collision of past and present, the way seeing someone in a wheelchair in a cafe on a Saturday afternoon detonated a chain of associations he could not control. Shelby in the hospital bed, the machines, the sound the heart monitor made when it stopped being a rhythm and became a line. The way the nurses moved with rehearsed compassion as though his wife's death was a choreography they had performed 100 times before. His legs told him to leave. His lungs told him to breathe. His hands shoved into his jacket pockets, curled into fists he did not consciously make. He stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds, maybe 40, long enough for the internal argument to cycle through 3 complete rounds. Then his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "If you're the tall guy frozen on the sidewalk, your coffee's getting cold. I ordered you a black. You look like a black coffee kind of person." He looked up. Through the window, Claire Maddox was watching him with an expression that was not pity and was not judgment and was not anything he could categorize. She raised her coffee cup in a small salute. Weston Calloway pulled open the door and walked inside. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans and old paperbacks. The sound system was playing something acoustic and inoffensive. Claire's table was in the corner by the window, positioned so her wheelchair had room on one side and an empty chair waited on the other. She extended her hand as he approached, and her grip was firm, her skin warm. "Weston." "West. Nobody calls me Weston except my mother when she's angry." "West. I like that." She gestured to the chair. "Sit. You look like you need to sit." He sat. The coffee she had ordered for him was black and still hot. No sugar, no cream, which was either a lucky guess or a woman who paid very close attention to the kind of person who stood on sidewalks looking like they were calculating escape routes. "I should have mentioned the wheelchair," Claire offered, though her tone suggested she was not apologizing so much as acknowledging a logistical reality. I keep forgetting it's the first thing people see. I wasn't. You were standing outside for almost a minute. It's okay. Most people need a moment. Her smile was the kind that had been forged in fire, the kind that cost something to produce, and was therefore worth more than the effortless version. Here's what I suggest. You ask me whatever question is burning through your brain right now. I answer honestly, and then we can skip the next 15 minutes of awkward small talk and get to the part where we actually find out if we like each other. Weston looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them blinked. What happened? Car accident. 4 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light on Route 17 near the Gloucester interchange. I was in the passenger seat. My friend who was driving walked away with a bruised rib. I woke up in the hospital and the doctors told me I would never feel my legs again. The words were delivered without drama, without self-pity, without the trembling vulnerability that people expected from stories like this. She recounted them the way you recount the plot of a film you watched once and found moving but no longer needed to cry about. I'm sorry. Thank you, but I'm not looking for sorry. I'm looking for coffee and conversation with someone who doesn't treat me like I'm made of crystal. She took a sip of her latte. Vanilla from the smell. Foam art on top that the barista had shaped into something that might have been a heart or might have been a lopsided leaf. Your turn, she continued. Jake told me you lost your wife, which means either he has no boundaries or he cares about you a lot. Possibly both. Both. Weston looked down at his hands, which were wrapped around the coffee cup as though it were the only warm thing left in the world. Her name was Shelby. She died 4 years ago. His jaw worked the words fighting each other on the way out. I'm not ready to tell that story yet. Not today. Maybe not for a while. He did not say the rest. He did not say that Shelby had spent 9 days on a ventilator before her body made the decision her doctors would not, or that the last thing she had done with her own hands was write June's name on a napkin by the hospital bed, or that he had framed that napkin and hung it in his daughter's room where it still hung. Now the ink fading but the letters holding the way, love holds even when the hand that wrote it is gone. Claire reached across the table and touched his hand. Not his whole hand, just the knuckles, the lightest possible contact, the kind of touch that said, I am here without demanding anything in return. I won't pretend I understand, she said softly. Loss is different for everyone, but I know what it's like to have your life split into before and after. They talked. At first it was careful, 2 people circling each other the way you circle a dog you are not sure is friendly, testing boundaries, watching for warning signs. But Claire had a way of dismantling guardedness that felt less like intrusion and more like architecture, as though she were building a doorway where a wall had been and inviting him to walk through it whenever he was ready. She had been a dance instructor before the accident. Hip-hop for teenagers, ballroom for adults, private lessons for wedding couples who moved like they had been assembled from spare parts. She described it with such precision that Weston could almost see her spinning across a studio floor, music so loud the walls shook her body, a conversation between gravity and defiance. I still teach, just different now. Online tutoring for kids who need help with school, math, English, science. It's not dance, but it's something. Do you miss it? A shadow crossed her face, brief like a cloud passing in front of the sun. Every single day. But missing something and being destroyed by it are 2 different things. I grieve what I lost. I just refuse to let the grief swallow me whole. Weston took a sip of his coffee. It had gone cold. That's remarkably mature. Or remarkably stubborn. I prefer stubborn. It sounds tougher. He almost smiled. Almost. You seem tough already. You're just saying that because you feel guilty about hesitating on the sidewalk. You saw that. Hard to miss. 30 seconds, maybe 40, I counted. I almost left. What stopped you? Weston considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of being scared of everything. Of messing up with my daughter, of making wrong choices, of feeling anything at all. I haven't been on a date since Shelby died. 4 years of saying no to every invitation, every suggestion. And then Jake cornered me at work and I was too exhausted to fight. So you're here out of exhaustion. Partly. And partly because my 7-year-old told me that someday is a word people use when they mean never, and I realized she was right. Claire's eyebrows rose. She sounds extraordinary. She's the only reason I get out of bed. What's her name? June. Like the month. Shelby picked it. She said June was the month everything grew. Something in Claire's expression softened. Not pity. Something adjacent to pity, but warmer, more generous. Recognition, maybe. The look of one survivor acknowledging another. They talked for another hour. Favorite films. Terrible television. Foods they refused to eat. Claire confessed an addiction to reality dating shows so aggressively trashy that she watched them with the volume low so nobody would judge her. Weston admitted he had memorized every episode of a nature documentary series because June watched it on repeat, and he lacked the will to suggest alternatives. Then the conversation drifted toward the accident, not the emotional aftermath, but the details. And this is where the air in the cafe changed temperature. Route 17, Claire repeated, responding to a question Weston had not yet asked, but that his face was clearly forming. Near the Gloucester interchange, October 14th. Around 9:45 at night. The date landed on him like a collapsing roof. October 14th, 4 years ago, Route 17 near Gloucester, that was the date. That was the road. That was the intersection where a drunk driver had crossed the center line and struck 2 vehicles in succession, killing 1 person, paralyzing another, and walking away with scratches. The person who had been killed was Shelby Calloway. Weston's entire body went rigid. His coffee cup trembled in his hand. The noise of the cafe, the acoustic music, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, all of it collapsed into a high-pitched whine, the sound of his own blood roaring through his ears. Claire was still talking. She was saying something about the hospital, about the weeks of rehabilitation, about waking up and not being able to feel her legs, but Weston could not hear her because the entire architecture of this afternoon, the coffee, the laughter, the careful connection he had been building word by word, had just detonated. The woman sitting across from him, the woman whose hand had touched his knuckles with such gentle precision, the woman who understood his grief because she carried her own, was not a stranger who shared a similar tragedy. She was a survivor of the same tragedy, the exact same collision, the same drunk driver, the same red light, the same 9:45 on an October night that had split both of their lives into before and after. Claire did not know. She did not know that the man across from her had buried his wife because of the same impact that had taken her legs. She did not know that the before and after she had described was his before and after too, that they were connected not by coincidence, but by catastrophe, that the drunk driver who had destroyed her body had also destroyed his world. Weston should have told her, right there, right then. He should have set down his coffee and said the words and watched her face change and dealt with whatever came next. That is what a brave man would have done. That is what the man he used to be, the engineer who trusted his own calculations, the husband who had kissed Shelby goodbye without knowing it was the last time, would have done. But Weston Calloway was not brave. He had not been brave in 4 years. Bravery required reserves he had spent down to nothing, and what remained was just enough to sit in this chair and keep breathing and not let the woman across from him see that the ground beneath his feet had just opened into a chasm so deep he could not see the bottom. So he swallowed the truth, washed it down with cold coffee. And when Claire suggested they do this again next week, he heard himself say yes, which was either the beginning of something real or the most dangerous lie he had ever told. And at that moment, standing in the debris of a revelation he could not share. Weston Calloway genuinely did not know which one it was. He drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the rhythmic thump of his heartbeat and the growing weight of a secret that was already too heavy to carry and too explosive to set down. At home, June was waiting on the couch, a book open on her lap, her babysitter, Mrs. Kendrick, knitting in the armchair. "How was your thing, Daddy?" "It was good." "Was it a date?" Mrs. Kendrick coughed diplomatically and began gathering her things. "It was just coffee. Mrs. Bellamy says, I know what Mrs. Bellamy says." June studied him with those ancient eyes, those eyes that missed nothing and forgave everything. "You look different." "Different how?" "Like somebody turned a light on inside you, but you're trying to hide it." She returned to her book. "It's okay, Daddy. You're allowed to have the light." He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like strawberry shampoo and school glue. "Thanks, Bug." "Daddy." "Yeah." If she's nice, you should see her again, even if you're scared. Brave people are scared too, Mrs. Bellamy told us. Weston stood in the living room of his rented apartment with the ghost of his wife in every photograph on the wall and the weight of an impossible secret in his chest and his 7-year-old daughter granting him permission to be human again, and for the first time in 4 years he felt something crack open inside him that he had been certain was sealed permanently shut. It was not hope. Not yet. Hope was still too expensive, still too dangerous, still too close to the thing that had destroyed him once and could destroy him again. But it was adjacent to hope. It was in the same neighborhood. And for a man who had been living in the dark for 4 years, even the suggestion of light was enough to make him squint. He went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep because sleep required the absence of thought, and thought was the one thing he could not turn off. The woman in the wheelchair, the date on the calendar, Route 17, October 14th, the drunk driver, Shelby, Claire. The two names circled each other in his mind like binary stars pulling at each other, distorting each other's gravity. Shelby, who had died. Claire, who had survived. Both casualties of the same moment, the same collision, the same man's decision to drink 7 whiskeys at a corporate function and get behind the wheel of a company car. A company car. The thought surfaced slowly the way wreckage rises from deep water. He had read the police report 4 years ago in those first terrible weeks when grief had made him ravenous for detail, when knowing exactly how Shelby had died seemed like it might give the death a shape he could hold and examine instead of letting it remain formless and enormous. The driver had been operating a vehicle registered to his employer, a company vehicle. The employer had been listed in the report, but Weston had not paid attention to the name because names did not matter when your wife was dead, because no amount of corporate letterhead could bring her back, because the driver had been charged with vehicular manslaughter, and that had seemed like enough. But now, lying in the dark, 4 years of distance providing clarity that grief had obscured, the question reformed itself with new edges. Whose company? Whose vehicle? Whose employee? And why had the driver who had killed a woman and paralyzed another served only 11 months of a 5-year sentence? The questions settled over him like a second blanket, heavier than the first. He did not have answers. He was not sure he wanted them. Answers had a way of demanding action, and action required energy, and energy was a resource he rationed more carefully than money. But the questions were there now, and questions, unlike grief, do not dissolve with time. They harden. They crystallize. They become structures that bear weight, and Weston Calloway, despite everything he had lost and everything he had forgotten about the man he used to be, was still an engineer. He still knew how to read a structure. He still knew how to find the cracks. The next 3 weeks moved in 2 parallel currents, one visible, one hidden, and Weston Calloway lived in both simultaneously, which is another way of saying he lived in neither. The visible current was the courtship. Saturday coffees became Tuesday evening walks, became a Thursday night at a small Italian place where the pasta was overcooked and the wine was cheap, and neither of them cared because the conversation was the meal and everything else was garnish. Claire Maddox had a way of occupying space that defied the geometry of the wheelchair filling rooms with a presence that had nothing to do with standing and everything to do with the gravitational weight of a personality that refused to be diminished. She told stories with her hands. She laughed from somewhere deep in her diaphragm, a sound that hit Weston in the sternum every time. She asked questions that bypassed small talk entirely and landed in territory most people spent months approaching, and she did it not because she lacked social grace, but because she had decided at some point during the 3 years since the accident that life was too abbreviated for the scenic route. The hidden current was the investigation. Monday through Friday, after his shift at Harmon Industrial, Weston drove to the Richmond Public Library and sat in a carrel in the reference section with a legal pad and a pencil and the slow-burning patience of a man who had once spent 14 months analyzing soil compression data for a parking garage in Norfolk. He pulled the original police report from the county records archive. He requested the accident reconstruction diagram through a public records request that cost him $11 he did not have. He found the driver's name, a man called Gerald Pettis, and tracked his sentencing through the Virginia court system's online database, and what he found there was the first crack in a wall he had not known existed. Gerald Pettis had been employed by Grayson Development as a project coordinator. The vehicle he had been driving, a company-issued sedan, was registered to the Grayson corporate fleet. The blood alcohol content recorded at the scene was .19, more than twice the legal limit. He had been charged with 1 count of vehicular manslaughter and 1 count of driving under the influence causing serious bodily injury. The prosecution had recommended 8 to 12 years. The judge had sentenced him to 5. He had served 11 months at the Greensville Correctional Center before being released on a technicality related to the chain of custody of his blood sample. Weston read that last detail 3 times. Chain of custody. The blood sample that proved Pettis was drunk had been handled improperly, or at least that was the argument his defense attorney had made and the appeals court had agreed. And 11 months after killing Shelby Calloway and paralyzing Claire Maddox, Gerald Pettis had walked out of prison and disappeared from every public record Weston could access. The defense attorney's name was Howard Keswick of Keswick, Lanier and Roth. Weston searched the firm's client list, which was not public but whose contours could be inferred from court filings and news coverage. Grayson Development appeared 17 times in the past decade. Howard Keswick was not just Gerald Pettis's lawyer, he was Victor Grayson's lawyer. The same firm that defended the corporation's interests in zoning disputes and environmental complaints had also defended the man who killed Weston's wife while driving a Grayson Company car home from a Grayson Company event. The cracks were widening. The structure was unsound, and Weston, despite every instinct telling him to walk away to go home to hug his daughter and accept that the dead stay dead regardless of who put them in the ground, could not stop reading. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself it was the engineer in him, the part of his brain that could not leave a structural failure undiagnosed. He told himself it had nothing to do with rage because rage was a luxury he could not afford, and because rage required admitting that Shelby's death might not have been the random act of a random drunk, but the final domino in a chain of negligence that someone with money and lawyers had worked very hard to obscure. He told himself all of these things, and none of them were entirely true, and none of them were entirely false. And the gap between those two positions was exactly wide enough for a man to fall through. On the 4th Saturday, Claire invited him to the park. A paved loop around a man-made lake, flat enough for her wheelchair shaded by oaks that were beginning to surrender their leaves to autumn. They walked and rolled side by side, and the conversation drifted into the territory it had been approaching since the first coffee, the territory of damage of the people who had failed them, of the wreckage that other humans leave behind when they decide that loyalty is conditional. Claire told him about Derek Pruitt. They had been together 4 years, engaged for 7 months. The wedding venue was booked, the invitations printed, the caterer selected. Derek was charming and ambitious and worked in corporate marketing and said the right things at the right times with the fluency of a man who had studied sincerity the way some people study languages competently but without native fluency. After the accident, Derek had been there. Hospital visits every day. Flowers. The right words again, always the right words. But the visits shortened, the calls thinned. The silences between texts stretched from hours to days. And one evening, 6 weeks after Claire woke up in a body she no longer recognized, Derek had sat in the chair beside her hospital bed and explained with the measured cadence of someone delivering a quarterly earnings report that he loved her very much, but that he could not be what she needed, that she deserved someone equipped for this, that he was not that person, and that he hoped she understood. Then he walked out and the door closed behind him with the softest possible click, which Claire later decided was the cruelest part, that he had not even slammed it, that he had left her life with the same careful politeness with which he had entered it. "I spent a year believing him," Claire continued, her voice steady in the way that only voices with fractures underneath can be steady. "A year thinking he was right, that the wheelchair had made me less, that no one would want the logistics of loving someone like me. The ramps, the doctors, the physical therapy, the days when my body feels like a cage I can't unlock." Weston listened without interrupting, which was not a strategy but a reflex. He had learned at Shelby's bedside that the most useful thing a person could do in the presence of someone else's pain was to shut up and be present and resist the urge to fix what could not be fixed. "What changed?" he asked when she paused. "Exhaustion. Same as you." A half smile aimed mostly at herself. "Being angry is a full-time job, and I was already working too. At some point I had to choose between being consumed by what I lost or finding a way to build something from what I still had. So I chose building. Not because I'm brave, because I was too tired to keep burning." Weston reached over and took her hand. He did not plan it. His body simply decided independent of the committee of fears that usually governed his movements. Claire looked down at their joined fingers, then up at him, and something in her expression shifted, A lock turning a door opening onto a room she had boarded up and assumed she would never enter again. "You're doing it again," she observed quietly. "Doing what?" "The thing where you just show up. No performance, no grand declarations, just quiet presence. Do you know how rare that is?" He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, which turned out to be exactly the right response because Claire leaned toward him and kissed him briefly, gently, a question mark made of contact, and when she pulled back her eyes were bright and her smile was the real one, the expensive one, the one that cost something to produce. "Took you long enough," she whispered. The 5th week. The investigation deepened. Weston found an article in the Richmond Register-Tribune from 3 years ago, a short piece buried in the Metro section about a lawsuit filed against Grayson Development by the family of a construction worker who had died on one of their job sites. The lawsuit alleged that Grayson had knowingly used substandard materials in a residential development and that the resulting structural failure had killed an electrician named Robert Haney. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. The family's attorney had declined to comment. Grayson Development had issued a statement expressing sympathy and denying wrongdoing. Weston added Robert Haney's name to the legal pad that was becoming a map of something he did not yet have a name for. The 6th week. Claire came to the apartment for dinner. Weston had scrubbed the kitchen, vacuumed the living room, attempted spaghetti from a recipe he found online, and realized standing in the doorway with Claire at the bottom of 3 concrete steps that he had not thought about accessibility. "I'm an idiot. There are steps." "How strong are you?" "Strong enough. I weigh about 120 with the chair. If you can lift that, we're inside in 60 seconds. He positioned himself behind the wheelchair and she guided him through the angles, and within a minute they were in the kitchen, and the apartment smelled like garlic and tomato sauce and something else, something that had not existed inside these walls in 4 years. Life. The apartment smelled like life. They ate, they talked. Claire complimented the spaghetti. Weston confessed he had watched 4 videos to make sure he did not burn the garlic. With an expression that Weston chose to interpret as permission. Claire noticed the photograph. She did not look away from it, did not pretend it was not there. "She's beautiful." She was. "Tell me about her. Not the dying, the living." So Weston talked about Shelby alive. Shelby who argued about paint colors with prosecutorial intensity. Shelby who sang off-key in the shower and denied it. Shelby who read to June every night doing different voices for each character, so committed to the performance that June once asked if Mommy was secretly an actress. Shelby who had looked at him across a crowded lecture hall in their junior year of college and said without preamble, "You're going to buy me coffee and we're going to talk about the load-bearing capacity of your personality." Claire laughed, a real laugh, the kind that made Weston's chest ache in a way that was not grief, but was adjacent to it the way a scar aches when the weather changes. Then Claire asked the question that cracked the evening open. "West, have you ever looked into the accident, the driver, the sentencing, any of it?" His blood cooled. "Why do you ask?" "Because I have, for years. The driver worked for some big development company. He was at a corporate event, got hammered, got behind the wheel, and somehow he served less than a year for killing someone and destroying my spine." Her jaw tightened. "I've always thought there was more to the story. The blood test that got thrown out. The defense attorney who specializes in corporate clients. None of it sits right." The room was very quiet. On the bookshelf, Shelby watched. "Have you found anything?" Weston's voice came out careful, controlled, the voice of a man diffusing something explosive. "Pieces. Nothing solid. I filed a public records request last year and half the documents came back redacted. I contacted the prosecutor who handled the case and she wouldn't return my calls. It feels like every door I open has another locked door behind it." Weston sat with this information the way you sit with a live grenade. Claire had been investigating the accident independently. She had been pulling at the same threads he had been pulling, arriving at the same walls he had been hitting, and neither of them had known about the other's search because neither of them had told the truth about the connection they shared. He should have told her then. The moment was there, wide open, waiting for him to step into it. "Claire, the driver who killed your friend and paralyzed you also killed my wife. We are not 2 strangers who share similar tragedies. We are 2 survivors of the same catastrophe, and I have known this since our first coffee, and I have been lying to you by omission for 6 weeks. The words formed in his throat and died there, because telling Claire meant losing Claire, and losing Claire meant returning to the apartment, and the silence, and the 2-minute ritual in the school parking lot, and the slow grinding loneliness that had been eroding him like water erodes stone, and he was not strong enough for that. He was barely strong enough for this. So he swallowed it again. And the secret fed twice now grew heavier. The 7th week brought the collision he had not planned for. It was a Tuesday. Weston was 40 minutes away, stuck on I-64, after a parent-teacher conference Jake had dragged him to at Harmon's corporate office when his phone rang. June's school. The nurse. A fall on the playground. A gash on her knee deep enough to need attention. Could a parent come? He called his neighbor. No answer. Called Sophie 3 hours away. Voicemail. Stood in stalled traffic with his knuckles white on the steering wheel and his daughter bleeding in a nurse's office and his options narrowing to 0. He called Claire without thinking. The words came out in a single compressed breath. June's hurt at school and I'm stuck in traffic and I don't have anyone else. What school? Ridgemont Elementary. Text me the address, I'm leaving now. 22 minutes later, Claire rolled into the nurse's office and found June sitting on the examination table with a bandaged knee and dried tear tracks on her cheeks. The girl looked up, confusion flickering across her face, followed by recognition, followed by something that looked remarkably like relief. "You're the coffee lady?" Claire blinked. "I suppose I am. Daddy told me about you. He said you were nice and that maybe I could meet you sometime, but he didn't say it would be like this." June gestured at her knee. "This is embarrassing." "Why embarrassing?" "Because I'm 7. I shouldn't cry over a scraped knee." Claire moved closer. "I cried for 3 straight days when I broke my wrist in 3rd grade. And I was 8. Pain doesn't check your age before it hurts." The nurse cleared them to leave. June slid off the table, wincing, grabbed her backpack and followed Claire into the hallway. The walk to the parking lot was quiet, but Weston's daughter had the same incapacity for suppressing curiosity that her mother had possessed, and by the time they reached the van, the dam had broken. "You can ask," Claire offered, pressing the button to extend the ramp. "Whatever you're wondering. Daddy says it's rude to ask about wheelchairs." "It can be, but I don't mind. Not from you." June chewed her bottom lip, a gesture so precisely Shelby's that Claire could not have known the knife she was turning. "Why do you use one car accident? 4 years ago. My leg stopped working. Does it hurt? Not anymore? Not the way you'd think? Can you walk at all? Not even a little." June processed this with the focused intensity of a child assembling a puzzle. Then she asked the question that mattered, "Does it make you sad?" "Sometimes. But mostly I've learned to build a life around it. Kind of like how your dad learned to build a life after losing your mom." June's face shuddered. "He told you about her?" "He did. Everyone says they're sorry when they find out." "Does it help when they say it?" "No, but thanks anyway." The drive took 15 minutes. June gave directions in a small voice, her hands folded in her lap. When they reached the apartment, June stared at the steps, then at Claire, and a calculation visibly occurred behind those enormous brown eyes. "Wait here." She disappeared around the side of the building and returned dragging 2 wooden planks that had once been shelves in the hall closet. With the determination of a child who had decided that physics would bend to her will, she positioned them against the steps, tested their stability by pressing down with her foot, and gestured for Claire to proceed. "I saw this on a show once. A kid made a ramp for his grandma. June, I appreciate it, but I'm not sure these will—" "Just try. I'll spot you." Against every reasonable judgment, Claire rolled toward the makeshift ramp. The boards bowed. The angle was steep. But June stood beside her with both hands on the armrest. Her small body braced as though she could physically hold the laws of engineering at bay, and somehow, improbably, they made it to the landing. June pumped her fist and immediately grabbed her knee. "Ow!" Worth it. Totally worth it. Inside, June poured 2 glasses of water with the ceremonial gravity of a hostess at a formal dinner, and they sat in the living room, and the conversation that followed was the kind that children specialize in, and adults have forgotten how to have honest, unfiltered, free of every social lubricant that makes adult interaction bearable and dishonest in equal measure. "Are you and my dad going to get married?" Claire nearly choked on her water. "Jake told Daddy he needed to start dating so he wouldn't be lonely forever, and now you're here. So I figured it was serious." We're still figuring things out. Do you like him? Very much. Does he like you? I think so. June nodded. Good. He's been sad for a long time. I want him to be not sad. She picked at the edge of her bandage. Can I ask you something else? Sure. If you and Daddy get married, will you be my new mom? The question detonated silently. Claire set her water down with deliberate care. I don't know. But I know this, if your dad and I stay together, I won't try to replace your mom. Nobody could. She was special and she loved you, and that's something no one can take away. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. That's okay. That happens. It doesn't feel okay. I know. Claire leaned forward. But here's what doesn't fade. Love. Even when you can't remember exactly how someone sounded, the love they gave you stays. It becomes part of who you are. It lives in you even when you can't hear it anymore. June's eyes glistened. She wiped them with the back of her hand. I think Mom would like you. I hope so. I'm going to go play in my room. You can stay down here. Daddy should be home soon. Thanks, June. At the stairs, June turned back. Hey, Claire. Yeah. Thanks for coming to get me, even though it was weird. Claire smiled. Anytime, kid. Weston arrived 30 minutes later, panic radiating off him like heat from pavement. He burst through the door, called June's name, heard her muffled response from upstairs, and sagged against the wall in relief. Then he saw Claire on the couch and the makeshift ramp still propped against the front steps, and the 2 water glasses on the coffee table, and the full picture assembled itself. She built you a ramp, he managed. She did, and we had a very enlightening conversation about marriage and whether I'm going to be her new mother. He paled. She asked you that. She's 7, and she's processing. It's fine. Better than fine, actually. She's remarkable, West. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put you in that position. You needed help. I was available. That's how this works. She reached for his hand. Sit down before you fall down. He sat. He breathed. And he looked at Claire Maddox on his couch in his apartment with his daughter's water glass still on the table and his dead wife's photograph still on the shelf, and the 2 currents of his life, the visible and the hidden, pulled at each other so hard he could feel the undertow in his chest. That night, after Claire left and June was asleep, Weston sat at the kitchen table with his legal pad and a laptop he had bought second-hand for $200. He typed a name into a search engine, Victor Grayson. The results filled the screen. Victor Grayson, 68, founder and CEO of Grayson Development, one of Virginia's largest commercial real estate firms. Net worth estimated at $400 million. Philanthropist. Donor to 3 governors' campaigns. Board member of the Richmond Economic Alliance. Face like carved granite. Eyes like a man who had made decisions that cost people things they could not get back and had rationalized every one. Weston scrolled through press coverage, financial disclosures, property records. Grayson Development had built shopping centers, office parks, residential complexes across the Mid-Atlantic. In the past decade, 3 workplace safety violations, 2 environmental complaints, and the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Robert Haney's family, all settled, all sealed, all erased from the public narrative with the thoroughness of a man who understood that reputation was a structure too, and that structures could be reinforced. Then Weston found something that stopped his scrolling. A photograph from a Grayson Development corporate gala dated the night of October 14th, 4 years ago. The same night, the same event Gerald Pettis had attended before getting behind the wheel. In the photograph, Pettis stood in the background holding a drink, but the foreground was occupied by 2 men shaking hands. One was Victor Grayson. The other was a younger man, early 30s, dark hair, expensive suit, a smile calibrated to convey ambition and deference in equal measure. The caption read, Victor Grayson with Derek Pruitt, Director of Marketing, Grayson Development. Derek Pruitt. Claire's ex-fiancé. The man who had left her in a hospital bed 6 weeks after the accident. The man who had said all the right words and then walked away with the softest possible click of the door. Derek Pruitt worked for Victor Grayson. Had worked for him the night of the accident. Had been at the same gala where Gerald Pettis had gotten drunk on company liquor before driving a company car into the intersection that killed Shelby and crippled Claire. The coincidence was too precise to be a coincidence. Weston closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the sound of his daughter breathing upstairs through the thin ceiling, and the two currents of his life were no longer parallel. They were converging, rushing toward each other with the force of water seeking its own level, and the point where they would meet was approaching faster than he could prepare for. 2 days later, Derek Pruitt reappeared in Claire's life. She told Weston about it on the phone, her voice a complicated mixture of irritation and something she was trying very hard not to call hope. Derek had called out of nowhere. He had been in therapy. He had done work on himself. He wanted to apologize properly, face to face, no expectations. "I told him no," Claire continued, "but he kept calling. And then he showed up at my building yesterday with flowers and this whole speech about accountability and growth, and honestly, West, he sounded different. He sounded like someone who actually understood what he did." Weston's grip on the phone tightened until the case creaked. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about meeting for coffee, not to reconcile, just to hear him out." A pause. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About the fact that Derek Pruitt was in that gala photograph standing 3 feet from Victor Grayson. About the fact that his sudden reappearance 3 years after walking away coincided exactly with the period when Claire had been filing public records requests and calling prosecutors and pulling at threads that someone very powerful wanted left untouched. About the fact that Derek's return might not be redemption at all, but reconnaissance, a surveillance operation dressed in the language of therapy and personal growth. "About whether he deserves your time," Weston managed. Which was not a lie. It was just not the whole truth, and by now the distance between those two things had become the space Weston lived in, a narrow corridor between honesty and protection that was getting narrower every day. The following week, the car appeared outside June's school. A black sedan, no plates visible, from where Weston parked, idling in the visitor lot at Ridgemont Elementary at 3:15 on a Monday, 3:22, on a Tuesday, 3:08 on a Wednesday. Always the same position, always the same tinted windows, never there when Weston pulled in to pick up June, but Mrs. Bellamy mentioned it at pickup on Thursday casually, the way teachers mention things that concern them without wanting to alarm. "Mr. Calloway, there's been a vehicle in the lot this week that none of the staff recognize. It's probably nothing. Parents from the after-school program sometimes park there, but I wanted you to be aware." Weston thanked her and drove June home with his eyes on the rearview mirror for the entire 12-minute trip. The sedan did not appear. But that night, sitting in the kitchen with the legal pad and the photograph of Victor Grayson and Derek Pruitt shaking hands at a gala that had ended with his wife's death, the math assembled itself into a conclusion he could no longer avoid. Grayson knew someone was digging. Claire's records, requests, her calls to the prosecutor, her questions about the blood test chain of custody. All of it had generated friction, and friction generated heat, and heat attracted the attention of men who had spent 4 years keeping a fire extinguished. Derek's return was not coincidence. It was containment. And the car at June's school was not a parent from the after-school program. It was a message. Weston Calloway had spent 4 years being invisible, being small, being the kind of man who does not threaten anyone because he does not aspire to anything beyond survival. But invisibility is a kind of armor, and armor only works until someone decides to look for the man wearing it. Someone was looking now. He should have told Claire. He should have told the police. He should have packed June into the truck and driven to Sophie's house and disappeared into the anonymity of distance. Instead, he did what engineers do when they discover a structural failure. He assessed the load-bearing capacity of the problem, calculated the point of maximum stress, and began designing a solution. The solution required information he did not have. Information that lived inside Grayson Development's corporate offices in files that no public records request would ever reach, in correspondence between lawyers and executives that had been written with the specific intention of never being read by anyone outside the room. It required doing something he had never done before, something that would make him not just a man with questions, but a man with crimes of his own. But that was weeks away. First, the visible current demanded his attention. Claire called on a Wednesday night, her voice a wire pulled tight enough to sing. Her doctor had been running tests, pain in her lower back radiating into her legs, even though she could not feel them worsening for weeks. The MRI results were due Monday. The possibilities ranged from manageable inflammation to progressive nerve damage that could require surgery with no guarantee of improvement. Weston drove to her apartment that night after calling Mrs. Kendrick to sit with June. He found Claire in her wheelchair by the window, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the chair, and everything to do with the look on her face, the look of someone standing at the edge of a cliff they had already fallen from once. "I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have dumped this on you." "Stop. You called because you were scared. That's trust, not burden." "What if it's bad, West? What if the accident isn't done taking things from me?" He knelt so they were eye level. "Then we figure it out, together." "You keep saying we, because that's what it is now." He went with her to the imaging center Monday morning, called in sick, bought her a vanilla latte on the way because he paid attention, and attention, he was learning, was the cheapest and most valuable currency in any relationship. The MRI took 45 minutes. The wait for results took 4 days. During those 4 days, Weston taught his classes of hydraulic systems and gearbox assemblies at Harmon Industrial, and sat in the library at night and pretended that the two halves of his life were not on a collision course. June noticed. Of course June noticed. Thursday night at dinner, pushing peas around her plate with the forensic attention of a child gathering evidence. "Is Claire going to be okay?" "She's dealing with some medical stuff, but she's going to be fine." "You're lying. Your eyebrows do that scrunchy thing when you lie." "What scrunchy thing?" June demonstrated, furrowing her brow with theatrical intensity. Despite everything, Weston laughed, and the laugh surprised him because it came from a place he thought had been sealed shut, and its escape suggested that some walls are less permanent than they appear. "Okay, I don't know if she's going to be fine, but I'm choosing to believe she will." June considered this. "Can I call her?" "You want to call Claire?" "To tell her I hope she feels better. That's what you're supposed to do when people are sick, right?" Mrs. Bellamy says caring about someone means showing up even when you can't fix anything. Weston handed her the phone. June retreated to the living room, and he listened to her voice drift back through the doorway, tentative at first, then animated, then laughing at something Claire had told her, and the sound of his daughter's laughter mingled with the muffled cadence of Claire's voice through the phone speaker was the closest thing to music he had heard in 4 years. June returned 15 minutes later, glowing. "She says I made her day, and she wants to know if we can go to the planetarium this weekend. We'll see." But what he thought was, please let Monday's results be manageable. Please let the accident be finished taking things from her. Please let this woman who has survived everything the world has thrown at her with more grace than anyone he has ever known be allowed to keep what she has left. Monday. Rain. Gray sky. The doctor called Claire at 2 in the afternoon. Claire texted Weston 3 words, "Results are in." He drove to her apartment after work and found her by the window, the same position as before, but her expression was different now. Not relief, exactly, more like the absence of the worst-case scenario, which is its own kind of grace. The inflammation was real but treatable, not progressive, not degenerative. Medication, physical therapy, 3 times a week, management rather than catastrophe. Weston felt the air leave his lungs in a rush he had not realized he had been holding. "That's good? That's really good?" "It's going to be expensive, even with insurance." "We'll figure it out?" "Those are my medical bills, West, not yours. Stop pushing me away every time the road gets rough." The words landed harder than he intended, and Claire's face did something complicated, cycling through anger and hurt and recognition in rapid succession before settling on a rawness that made his chest ache. "I'm not pushing you away. I'm trying to protect myself from needing you too much, from depending on you so completely that if you leave I won't be able to rebuild again." Her voice fractured. "Derek left because he couldn't handle my disability. What happens when you realize you can't handle it either? That's not going to happen. You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise you this." He took her face in his hands. "I have already seen you scared. I have already seen you breaking. And I am still here. I will be here tomorrow and the day after and every day until you stop expecting me to disappear. Because the people who love you don't leave when it gets hard, Claire. They stay. They build ramps out of old shelves if they have to. That's what love looks like when it means something." Claire's eyes filled. She pressed her forehead against his. "I love you, West. I've been trying not to. I've been trying to protect myself, but I can't stop." "Then stop trying." "I'm scared." "Good. So am I. Let's be scared together. I hear it's more efficient." She laughed through her tears, a broken, beautiful sound, And he held her while the rain drew lines down the window and the afternoon faded into evening, and the two currents of his life, the love he was building and the truth he was burying, rushed toward each other with the inevitability of water finding its own level. He could not keep both. He knew that now. The visible current and the hidden one would collide, and when they did, the impact would be catastrophic, and the only question that mattered was whether what they had built together was strong enough to survive it. Weston Calloway had been an engineer. He knew how to calculate load-bearing capacity. He knew how to identify the point at which a structure fails. And he knew with the quiet certainty of a man who reads cracks for a living that the point of failure was approaching fast. The collapse began with ashes. Claire found them on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the medical results, 2 weeks after she had started physical therapy, 1 week after she had told Weston she loved him in the rain-streaked light of her apartment window. She was in his garage looking for a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten the loose bracket on June's bike helmet when she noticed the metal trash can in the corner, the kind people use for burning yard waste, and inside it a layer of gray ash and half buried like a fossil in sediment, a scrap of paper that had survived the fire. She would not have looked twice, except that the scrap was printed on letterhead, partial letterhead. The top half was burned away, but the bottom retained enough to read a case number, a date 4 years old, and 3 words that rearranged her understanding of everything. Chain of custody. Claire Maddox had spent 3 years researching the accident that had taken her legs. She had filed records requests. She had called prosecutors who would not return her messages. She had memorized the case number, the way prisoners memorize the dimensions of their cells, and it was staring at her now from inside a burn barrel in Weston Calloway's garage. She sat in her wheelchair in the oil-stained silence and turned the scrap over in her fingers and felt the architecture of the past 6 months rearrange itself into a shape she did not recognize. Weston had this document. Weston had burned this document. Weston, who had listened to her talk about the accident with the careful attention of a man hearing a story for the first time, had possessed physical evidence related to the crash and had set it on fire, which meant he knew. Not in the abstract way that two people can share a parallel grief. He knew specifically. He knew the case, the driver, the cover-up. He knew that his wife and Claire's spine had been destroyed by the same impact, and he had known it since the beginning, and every coffee and dinner and kiss had been built on a foundation of concealment so total that Claire could not find the real floor beneath it. She did not cry. Crying required the kind of surprise that comes from being hurt by someone you did not expect to hurt you. Claire trusted Weston completely, and complete trust when betrayed does not shatter. It implodes, every floor falling into the one below it until nothing remains but dust. She was still sitting in the garage when Weston came home from the hardware store with June. He saw her face and the scrap of paper in her hand, and the color drained from his skin the way sound drains from a room when someone pulls the plug on the speakers. "How long have you known?" His mouth opened, but nothing emerged. "How long, West?" "Since the first coffee. Since you said the date and the road. 6 months." Every moment they had shared existed inside a lie so comprehensive that dismantling it would require examining each piece for contamination, and Claire did not have the energy for archaeology. She had the energy for one question. "You had evidence of a cover-up and you burned it. Why?" "Because 2 years ago, when that envelope showed up at my door, I was drowning, drinking every night after June fell asleep, barely holding on. I read those documents and all I could see was a road that would pull me away from my daughter, and I chose her. I chose survival over justice, and I have hated myself for it every single day since." "You chose cowardice." "Yes. And then you met me. You realized I was connected to the same crash, and instead of telling me the truth, you let me fall in love with you while you carried the biggest secret of both our lives. I was terrified that telling you would mean losing you. So you decided to lose me later instead." She wheeled past him and out of the garage and down the driveway without looking back. Weston stood in the space she had vacated and listened to the van start and pull away. The silence that followed was not absence. It was presence, the presence of everything he had broken. June appeared in the doorway between the garage and the kitchen. Her gaze moved from her father's face to the burn barrel to the tire marks Claire's van had left in the gravel, and the assessment that occurred behind those brown eyes was faster and more ruthless than any adult's. "Daddy, you're crying." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "I made a terrible mistake, Bug." "Is Claire coming back?" I don't know. She came and stood beside him and took his hand, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then June looked up and delivered the verdict with the plain economy of a child who has not yet learned to soften truth for comfort. Mrs. Bellamy says everyone messes up, but she says good people fix it even when fixing is the scary part. Are you going to fix it, Daddy? I don't know how. Start by telling the truth, all of it, to everyone. She squeezed his hand. Being brave doesn't mean the scared part goes away. It means you do the right thing while the scared part is screaming at you to stop. 7 years old, bare feet on cold concrete, a bandage still on her knee from the fall that had first brought Claire into their lives. And in her voice, not disappointment but expectation, the fierce, uncomplicated belief that her father was still capable of becoming the man she needed him to be. Weston spent the next 48 hours making phone calls. The first was to a journalist named Dana Whitfield at the Richmond Register-Tribune, the same paper that had published the buried article about the Robert Haney wrongful death settlement. He told her everything. The accident, the blood test manipulation, the 11-month sentence, the Grayson corporate gala, the Keswick law firm, Derek Pruitt's reappearance, the documents he had received and destroyed 2 years ago. He withheld nothing, including his own culpability, including the fact that he had burned evidence that might have brought justice years earlier, including the shame that occupied his chest like a stone he could not dissolve and did not deserve to. Dana Whitfield listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. Do you have anything physical left? The original documents are gone, but I remember what was in them. Case references, dates, names. And I know where the originals are stored. Grayson Development's corporate records office, 9th floor. I worked on the building's mechanical systems 2 years ago through Harmon Industrial. I know the layout. Mr. Calloway that's breaking and entering. I know what it is. I can't encourage that. You don't have to, but if documents arrive at your desk from an anonymous source, you have First Amendment protections and a public interest obligation. Silence. Then Dana Whitfield gave him her direct email, her personal cell number, and 5 words, "Be careful, don't get caught." The second call was to Claire. She did not answer. He called 3 times over 2 days. Each time her voicemail played her voice steady and warm, and each time he left a message that was shorter than the last because there are only so many ways to say I'm sorry before the phrase collapses under its own weight. On the 3rd day she texted 4 words, "Don't contact me again." He honored the request. Not because he wanted to, but because it was the only form of respect he had left to offer. The 3rd call was to Jake Brennan because Jake had started this and because Weston needed someone to watch June on Thursday night. I need you to stay with June at the apartment, overnight, no questions. West, every sentence that starts with no questions ends with someone getting arrested. Can you do it or not? Yeah, but look me in the eye at work tomorrow and tell me this isn't going to leave your kid without a father. I can't promise that. But I can tell you there's a company that killed my wife and crippled the woman I love and buried the evidence, and they will keep doing it until someone makes them stop. I am that someone, and if it costs me everything, at least June will know that her father stood up when it mattered instead of hiding for the rest of his life. Jake was quiet. Then, Thursday, I'll be at your place by 5. Thursday evening. Jake arrived with a duffel bag, a pizza, and a board game June had been begging to play for weeks. Weston kissed his daughter at the door. "Daddy, are you doing the brave thing?" "I'm trying, Bug." "Good, come back. Always." He drove to Richmond in the dark. The Grayson Development building was a 12-story glass tower on Broad Street, the kind of structure that announces power from the outside and conceals its compromises from everyone except those who understand load paths and shear walls and the places where shortcuts hide behind drywall. Weston had studied this building's blueprints when Harmon Industrial serviced the HVAC system, and the access codes to the service entrance had not been changed because building security is only as strong as the laziest link in the chain. Loading dock, service elevator, 9th floor, records room. The keypad code was still taped inside the maintenance panel, 4 digits scrawled in pencil by a technician who valued convenience over protocol. The lock clicked open. The room was fluorescent lit and climate-controlled filing cabinets organized by year and project number. Weston found the cabinet labeled with the year of the accident and began pulling folders. Personnel file for Gerald Pettis, internal correspondence about the corporate gala, A memo from Grayson's chief of operations to the legal department regarding incident response. And in a folder marked Confidential Litigation, hold the confirmation of everything. The original blood alcohol test showing a BAC of 0.19. A second test conducted 12 hours later at a private lab contracted by Keswick, Lanier, and Roth showing 0.06. An email from Howard Keswick to Victor Grayson's personal address. The chain of custody issue has been identified and will be raised at the appropriate time. No further action required on your end. No further action required. 5 words that meant we manufactured a legal technicality to free the man who killed a woman and paralyzed another, and you can sleep soundly because we have made the problem vanish. Weston photographed 37 pages, returned the folders, closed the cabinet, turned to leave. His phone buzzed. June's name on the screen. 11:47 at night. He answered, and the cold open of this story closed its loop. Her voice came through small and cracked the way it always sounded when she was trying not to cry. "Daddy, there's someone outside our house. They keep walking back and forth by the front window." His blood turned to ice. "Where's Jake?" "He fell asleep on the couch. I tried to wake him up, but he sleeps really hard, Daddy. I went to my room and pushed the chair under the handle like we practiced." "Good girl, stay there. I'm coming home right now." He hung up and called Jake. 3 rings before a groggy voice answered, then a sharp intake of breath as the situation registered. "I see the car. I see him. June's upstairs, door locked. I've got this, West. Get here." Weston's vision narrowed to a tunnel. Jake was awake now, positioned between June and the door built like a compact car and twice as stubborn. But the distance between the 9th floor of a building in Richmond and his apartment was 40 minutes of highway, and 40 minutes is a lifetime when your daughter has already barricaded herself in her bedroom and a stranger is approaching her door. "Lock everything. Keep her away from the windows. I'm coming." He ran. Stairs, not the elevator. Loading dock, parking lot, truck, ignition. Broad Street to I-64 accelerator pressed until the speedometer passed 90 and kept climbing. He called Claire. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Called a third time, and she answered with the cold precision of a woman who had severed him from her emotional vocabulary. "I told you not to call. Someone is outside my apartment. June is inside with Jake, but I'm 40 minutes away and I need help, Claire. I know you owe me nothing. I know I destroyed your trust. But my daughter is in that house and you are closer than I am, and I am begging you." 2 seconds of silence that contained an entire deliberation. "I'm leaving now." Claire Maddox drove her accessible van through residential streets at speeds that would have earned her a suspended license and arrived at Weston's apartment in 18 minutes. Jake had turned off the porch light. The street was quiet except for the black sedan still idling at the curb. A figure stood on the front walkway, not at the door but near it, pacing with the restless energy of a man executing an assignment he no longer believed in. Derek Pruitt. Claire recognized the silhouette before she recognized the face. The posture of practiced confidence undermined by visible agitation. The way he kept reaching for his phone and putting it back. She parked the van, extended the ramp, and rolled down it onto the sidewalk. "Derek." He turned. His face moved through surprise, shame, and something that settled into the particular misery of a person caught in the precise act they had been telling themselves they would never commit. "Claire, what are you? Grayson sent you." "It's not—" "Don't." She positioned her wheelchair between him and the front door with the deliberate placement of someone who understood that physical space was the only leverage she had and intended to use every inch of it. "You didn't come back into my life because you changed. You came back because your boss discovered I was asking questions and he needed a leash. And now you're standing outside a 7-year-old girl's home at midnight because a man in a corner office told you to retrieve documents that prove he covered up a killing." Derek's composure fractured. Not the rehearsed vulnerability he had performed in her apartment weeks ago, but the genuine disintegration of a man confronting the full inventory of what he had become. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone. Grayson just wants the files. He said if I retrieve them, this all goes away." "It already went away, Derek. 4 years ago. A woman died, and I lost my legs, and you stood in my hospital room and told me I deserved better, and the entire time you were working for the man who made it happen." Claire's voice carried a cold that had nothing to do with the November air. "You didn't leave me because you couldn't handle my disability. You left because every time you looked at me, you saw what your boss had done, and the guilt was heavier than the love." The accusation hung between them. Derek opened his mouth, closed it. His hands trembled at his sides. I didn't know. Not at first. I found out months after when Keswick mentioned the blood test in a meeting I was never supposed to attend. By then, I was in too deep. Grayson owns my career, my mortgage, my future. Walking away from him means walking away from everything I've built. So you walked away from me instead, because I was easier to lose. The front door opened. Jake filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the interior. Behind his leg, partially visible, June peered out in her planet pajamas, her face pale but her jaw set in a line that belonged on a much older person. "June, go back inside," Claire called. June did not move. She looked past Jake's arm at Derek with the unblinking directness of a child who has already survived the worst thing she can imagine and is therefore not impressed by a man in an expensive coat standing on her lawn. "Are you a bad person?" Derek flinched as if she had thrown something at him. "Because Mrs. Bellamy says there aren't really bad people, just people who keep choosing wrong until the wrong becomes who they are." Sirens in the distance. A neighbor's porch light snapped on. Derek looked toward the sound, then back at Claire, then at the small, unshakable girl in the doorway, and the last scaffolding of his self-justification gave way. He sat down on the front steps, put his head in his hands, and when he spoke, the words were not the polished therapy language he had deployed weeks earlier, but the raw, unprocessed kind that come from beneath every strategy and every script, the kind that cost something irreplaceable to produce. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving you in that hospital. For working for him. For being here tonight. For every choice that led me to this doorstep." The police arrived in 4 minutes. Derek did not resist. Did not call the lawyer whose number Grayson had provided. He sat on those concrete steps and talked. About the gala, and the company car, and the blood test, and the Haney settlement, and every internal document he had ever seen that proved Victor Grayson knew his employee was dangerously intoxicated and made a calculated decision to do nothing. He talked for 47 minutes, and the officers recorded every word. Weston arrived 11 minutes after the cruisers. He came around the corner too fast, parked at an angle that would have earned a ticket on any other night, and was out of the truck before the engine finished turning over. He registered the police lights, Derek on the steps, Jake in the doorway, Claire on the walkway, and June still visible behind Jake's arm, still barefoot, still watching everything with the unnerving composure of a child who has decided that falling apart is not an option. He crossed the lawn in 4 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her and pulled her against him. "Daddy, you're squishing me." "I know. Give me a minute." Claire came really fast. She told the man he couldn't come in. Jake said he was going to handle it, but Claire got here first and she handled it better because she used words instead of looking like she wanted to punch someone. Jake, still in the doorway, shrugged. "She's not wrong." Weston looked over June's head at Claire, who was giving her statement to an officer with the same methodical clarity she brought to every crisis. She met his eyes across the yard. The look she returned was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a cathedral, not a switch, and they were standing in the foundation trench. But it was acknowledgement. The recognition that a person who has failed catastrophically can still, if they choose, stop failing. The investigation accelerated after that night. Dana Whitfield published the story on a Tuesday. Front page. Above the fold, 37 photographs of internal documents accompanied by Derek Pruitt's sworn statement and the testimony of 2 former Grayson employees who had been waiting years for someone else to go first. The story spread across Virginia media within 48 hours and reached national outlets by Friday. Victor Grayson was arrested on a Wednesday morning in November, walking out of his Richmond office with Howard Keswick beside him and his expression set in the controlled neutrality of a man accustomed to managing outcomes. At the courthouse, before he posted bail, a reporter asked him if he had anything to say to the victims' families. Grayson paused on the steps. For a moment, the mask slipped, and what showed beneath was not defiance but exhaustion, the weariness of a man who had spent 4 years maintaining a lie and could feel the weight of it finally exceeding his capacity to bear it. "I made a decision," he told the cameras. "I believed it was the practical decision. 1 tragedy versus 3,000 jobs. 1 family's grief versus an entire company's survival. I told myself the math justified it." His voice thinned. The math was wrong. It was not an apology. It was not redemption. But it was the closest thing to honesty Victor Grayson had offered in 4 years, and it landed on Weston watching from his living room with June beside him and the television volume low with the force of something he had not expected to feel for this man: recognition. The recognition that cowardice wears different suits but speaks the same language, and that Grayson's decision to bury the truth and Weston's decision to burn the evidence were branches of the same poisoned tree. The trial lasted 9 months. Derek Pruitt testified for 6 hours on a Tuesday afternoon with the drained honesty of a man who had finally stopped outrunning his own conscience. The jury convicted Grayson on 2 of 3 charges. The judge, citing age and declining health, sentenced him to 4 years of house arrest, a $12 million fine, and the dissolution of Grayson Development's operating license in Virginia. The company's assets funded a victim compensation trust. Gerald Pettis was retried and sentenced to 8 years. The Virginia General Assembly passed legislation the following spring requiring corporate liability for employees who drive impaired after company events. The bill was called the Shelby-Callaway Act. Weston was not present for the signing. He was at home making pancakes, which had become a Saturday tradition that neither he nor June could remember starting, but that both of them understood was sacred. 1 year after the night Derek Pruitt stood on his walkway, Weston's life occupied a shape he could not have drawn 12 months earlier. He had left Harmon Industrial, passed the structural engineering recertification exam in the 97th percentile, and taken a position as a safety inspector for the Virginia Department of Housing. The pay was less than his old engineering salary, but more than the factory, and the work was the work he was made for: finding failures before they became catastrophes, reading the cracks, ensuring that the structures people lived inside would hold. Claire built a nonprofit, an online movement program for children with physical disabilities, founded on the principle that dance was not about legs, but about expression. That rhythm lived in the shoulders and the hands and the angle of a head, and that a body's relationship to music did not require permission from the parts of it that could not feel the floor. She taught from her wheelchair with precision and ferocity, and her students multiplied so quickly she hired 3 instructors within the first year. She and Weston did not reconcile quickly. Trust, once detonated, reassembles on its own schedule, and the schedule does not care about love or longing or the fact that 2 people want desperately to be in the same room again. There were conversations that lasted hours and resolved nothing, silences that lasted days and resolved everything, therapy separately and together. The unglamorous labor of 2 people dismantling the walls they had raised against each other and sorting through what survived. But Claire kept returning, and Weston kept opening the door, and June kept setting 3 plates at dinner on nights when only 2 people were confirmed, because children recognize the shape of a family forming before adults do, and the only thing required of the adults is to stop obstructing the geometry. On a Saturday in October 1 year and 1 week after that first coffee at the Mapleton Street Cafe, Weston drove Claire and June to the park where they had walked and rolled so many times that the paved loop felt like a corridor in their shared home. The leaves were turning. The air tasted like wood smoke. June sprinted toward the playground with the velocity of a child who has been told to walk and has decided that walking is a suggestion. Weston pushed Claire along the path, and his voice did something unreliable, which she noticed immediately because she had spent a year and a half cataloging every frequency his voice could produce, and this one was new. "You sound like you're going to be sick." "I might be." "Should I worry?" "Probably." But before he could reach into his jacket, Claire locked her wheels and turned to face him. "Wait, I need to go first." She took a breath that seemed to reorganize her entire body. "I've been in therapy for 5 months, working through all of it. Derek, the accident, my certainty that everyone I love will eventually calculate the cost of staying and decide I'm not worth the price." She reached for his hand. "My therapist asked me what I wanted, not what I thought I could realistically have, what I actually wanted if fear was not a factor." Her fingers tightened around his. "I want this, West. I want you and June and the life we nearly destroyed and rebuilt from the wreckage. I want to stop bracing for collapse and start trusting the foundation. So I am asking you, Weston Callaway, to marry me." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, and her eyes went wide, and the sound that came out of both of them was not laughter exactly, but something adjacent. The sound 2 people make when they arrive at the same destination from opposite directions, at the precise same moment, and realize that the universe, despite its general indifference, occasionally has a sense of timing. You have got to be kidding me. 3 weeks. I've been carrying this for 3 weeks. We are both proposing, simultaneously, in the same park where you once held my hand for the first time. It appears that way. This is the most ridiculous thing that has ever happened to me. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly because he had borrowed one of her rings from the bathroom counter and taken it to the jeweler, which was the kind of minor theft that felt proportional to their history. June materialized from the playground with the radar precision of a child who senses a significant event occurring outside her visual range. She looked at Claire's hand, then at her father's face, then at Claire's face. The assessment took 1.5 seconds. Finally, Daddy, that box has been in your sock drawer for a month. You are terrible at hiding things. A pause. Well, you used to be. The wedding was small. October. Outdoors in the same park on a day so blue it seemed like a special effect. June stood beside her father in a dress she had selected herself, distributing flower petals from a basket with the methodical focus of a person who understood that ceremony matters and waste is unacceptable. Jake served as best man and cried more than anyone, which he attributed to allergies and which no one believed. Sophie drove in from Norfolk. Weston's parents came from Cleveland, his father upright and careful after his own medical crisis. The previous winter, the man who had said from a hospital bed the words that had cracked open his son's paralysis, "Don't waste time waiting for courage. Courage shows up after you start moving." Claire's parents sat in the front row, her father gripping her mother's hand with the intensity of a man watching his daughter commit to someone who had hurt her and healed her and demonstrated through 12 months of daily choices that love is a practice and not a promise. Weston's vows were short. "Claire, I met you while carrying a secret that should have ended us before we began. I lied. I failed. I let fear author decisions that honesty should have written. And you chose after everything to let me try again. Not because I earned it, but because you understood that people are not their worst chapter. They are every page that follows. I will keep showing up. In difficulty and in ordinary Tuesdays and in every moment that asks me to choose between comfortable silence and difficult truth. I will choose truth. Every time. Because a man who hides from the hard things has no business standing beside a woman who has never once looked away from them. Claire's turn. West, 18 months ago I watched a man freeze on a sidewalk for 40 seconds and I thought he's terrified. And then I thought, good, so am I. And then I thought maybe two terrified people need each other more than two brave ones do. You didn't see my wheelchair as a problem to solve. You saw it as a fact, and then you looked past it to everything else, and everything else turned out to be enough. I promised to trust you, which is the most dangerous promise I know how to make because trust isn't a wall you build once and walk away from. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up next to someone capable of shattering you and you decide again to stay. The officiant pronounced them married. Weston kissed his wife. June launched the remaining flower petals skyward with a whoop that startled a flock of Canada geese off the lake, and the birds rose in a formation that pointed from every angle that mattered forward. At the reception in a community center with wide doorways and ramps at every entrance, June climbed onto a chair to reach the microphone and addressed the room with the poise of someone who had been rehearsing in her bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. My dad used to be really sad. Then he met Claire and things got complicated because that's what happens when people keep secrets. My dad kept a really big one, but then he told the truth and telling the truth fixed more things than the secret broke. She looked at Weston, then at Claire. My mom died when I was 3. I don't remember everything about her, but I think she'd want Dad to stop being sad and Claire makes him not sad, and she helps me with math and she drove really fast one night to make sure I was safe and that's what family does. She raised her juice box. To my dad and my new mom, thanks for not giving up on each other. The room held its breath for 3 seconds. Then the applause started and did not stop for a very long time. The first dance was the song Weston had played in the dark months ago, the night Claire woke crying because she had dreamed of dancing and the waking had been crueler than the dream. He guided her chair to the center of the floor and took her hands, and they moved the way they always had, imperfectly, honestly. 2 people who had discovered that rhythm has nothing to do with what your body can do and everything to do with what you are willing to feel. June joined them, then Jake, then both families. And soon the room was full of people swaying together, Not dancing exactly, but something that required no technique and no music and no permission, only the willingness to occupy the same space and call it enough. After the reception, the three of them drove home. June fell asleep in the back seat with her cheek against the window and flower petal stains on her fingers. Claire reached across the console and laced her hand through Weston's. The streetlights striped the dashboard in amber. The house appeared at the end of the block porch light on ramp at the entrance wide doorway, every modification a record of the work required to build a life that fits the people inside it, rather than demanding the people reshape themselves to fit. Weston pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine. For a long moment none of them moved. June's breathing was slow and steady in the back seat. The windows had fogged slightly from 3 sets of lungs, sharing the same air in the same small space, and the fog made the world outside soft and indistinct, as though everything beyond the car had agreed to wait. Claire squeezed his hand. "Ready?" He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, at his wife beside him, at the house that had once been a container for grief and had become, through stubbornness and failure and the slow accumulation of second chances, a container for something fiercer and messier and infinitely more alive. "Yeah," Weston Calloway told the woman he loved in the driveway of the home they had earned with their daughter dreaming behind them and the autumn dark settling gently over the roof. "I'm ready." And together they went inside.